All right, well, that's a wrap. Thank you, Brittany. And at this point, we'd like to transition from the formal Q&A session to the more informal, unstructured free-for-all. So if you would like to participate, kindly unmute yourselves and go at it. But I do believe we had a couple of questions that we did not address in the Zoom chat. Rob, did you want to go through those?
I'm going to go back to one of them here. Do changes of articulation suffice for being a change for a previous presentation of the melody? Or should there be something more substantial like a chord progression?
No, any change is any change, really. It could even be a dynamic change, really anything. It's not so much like, you have to think about from like, if you're gonna, people are only gonna listen to this once potentially, like obviously like more than once, but like the first time they listen to it, they're not gonna pick out like, oh, they moved to staccato here, or like, oh, they're just kind of gonna listen to it for the experience. And so it's every little change is just something new that they can listen to, that will keep their attention focused on the music that you've written. So it doesn't have to be something drastic each time. It's just to keep the audience's attention. If that makes sense.
One of my many other questions there was, I'm a bass bell ringer, and it shows, because I'd like to make an arrangement with the melody exclusively in the bass and the trebles just doing pretty little things above. Is that likely to get me lynched or anything?
No, I think the bass bell players would applaud you for it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Speaking as a bass bell player, right?
I'd play the heck out of that piece, yeah.
As a director, I often look for pieces where at least the melody moves into the bass clef. Like if I find a piece where it does, I'm like, that's on the plus side for me, because otherwise bass ringers are bored. And I find bass ringers sometimes have a hard time playing melody because they're so not used to it.
Well, that's one of the things, the way that things are with COVID and us going to all of the, I think we're going through the Jason Krug catalog at my choir. And I really do enjoy his arrangements where he sort of throws the melody all over the place and weaves it in. So you actually have to be paying attention. And I'd kind of like to embrace some of that in my own writing and arranging, but I've only been playing handbells for like 4 years now, I guess, and I'm still unsure of what kind of articulations work best with the different bells. I know there is no way I am thumb damping one of my big bells. It's just not happening. So I have a hand that goes sitting on top of it for the approximation. But I think I'm trying to figure out different levels of writing as far as like grade 1, grade 2, and I'm not sure what constitutes each, just that a lot of the stuff that I have swimming around in my head, I think would be like a grade 4 level, and I need to find a way to simplify it.
Like specifically, Maggie, was there a particular element that you wanted to ask Brittany a question about?
I think it's a lot of the things, what kind of articulations work well with the different bells. I think it's more a technical issue there for when I'm writing, do I write a gyro for the bass or do I keep that for the trebles? Because it hurts my wrist when I try to do a gyro, so.
Yeah, well, I would, my first thing I would say is you already identified as a bass bell ringer, so I think you may have more knowledge than you're giving yourself credit for when it comes to
possibly
for the bass bell. So yeah, if a gyro hurts you, then don't write it because it will probably hurt others. When it comes to kind of making sure that the melody is heard in the bass compared to the treble, one thing that I would consider is that when it comes down to the lower bells, people aren't always expecting that. So making it really clear that the melody has moved down there in your notation from like using those lines that you'll often see is a really good strategy just so from a player perspective. Also trying to keep the trebles more sparse So sometimes a thumb damp, it won't ring out as much. And even though, like, let's say you have like everything's rung instead of LV in the treble, if you have a thumb damp, you know for certain that it's going to be like the sound is going to diminish really quickly, versus someone might forget to dampen a treble bell. So if you are trying to like really make sure that it's heard, being intentional about those decisions, so that so yeah, that those would be probably my two things. I am a big fan of when things move into the battery or the bass bells. It's just, but it also can be really tricky to pull off, and you see it all the time in performances where the conductor's like shh, shh, like because you're trying to hear that, right? So it's kind of thinking about, well, if ringing is going to make the treble players do what they do, then maybe they need something else. Maybe they need thumb damps, or mallets even, something that they're more likely to make them take a second look at the page even, or dynamic marking can really help too, so that they're not just going away doing their thing, which is what all bell players get in the habit of doing sometimes, is the head down, not smiling, looking at the music. So
hey, Brittany, I actually have a question for you about the sonority of the bells. So I know that sometimes in the audience, when I'm listening to handbell music, you get a lot of the battery. I feel that the battery is that range of sound, that range of frequencies is what really carries. And the high trebles, you can hear them, they're because they're loud and they're kind of high and piercing. But I find that stuff from like kind of low battery into the basses, often just kind of, you hear that initial attack and then it's kind of gone. And I think, do you think that that's a challenge if you're trying to write a melody that is going to descend into the lower bass? Is there anything that you would advise, technically, as far as the arrangement is concerned, how you could try to handle situations like that?
That is a really interesting question. And so if I can get like a little bit nerdy just for a second. So every pitch in music, like our knowledge of pitch, like A, B, C, D, E, is actually like a perspective thing to the human ear. And so each note is actually associated with a frequency that we measure in hertz, which is also the same thing that we use in electronics. It's a measurement. So specifically with hertz, and the way that our ears perceive sound, the idea of warmth comes from what we call the mid-range, which is anywhere between like 400 hertz and like 2000 hertz kind of thing.
Yeah.
And once you get a bit higher, you kind of go into your that's where you get into your treble. So with this whole range thing and this whole idea, so yeah, when you're listening to a performance, the trebles are going to stick out because the human ear actually perceives those sounds higher and louder than other notes, other pitches. That's just the way that our body is like physically made. And so when you're kind of thinking about this, and from a writing perspective, knowing that right off the bat is really good to, that the battery tends to get muddy and the bass bells really fast and really quickly. And that's where you'll hear the attack, but then everything after that is kind of this like wah and like whoosh kind of thing.
Yeah.
That is like because of the human ear. We can't change that. So to kind of compensate for that, that's when you kind of have to think about maybe like your attacks and even just like the density of how much you're going. So without like trying to get super technical when it comes down to like the math of it, is I actually like see like this range that we call the mid-range, how many instruments are playing in that range. And if there's too many, that's when we lose focus of the song as a whole. And so if we're moving things like down into the bass and all of a sudden you have your battery and your bass bells all ringing out, all of those frequencies are kind of adding on top of each other and adding to that muddiness. So you kind of want to get that out of the way. So that's where you want to think about like shorter attacks, staccato, your marts, your mallet, stuff like that will help it come out more. But to have like a lyrical melody of everything ringing and stuff in the bass bells, it's not gonna sing as much as it might in the treble, just because it's the way the human ear and the brain is built.
Sometimes
yeah,
I've seen.
if you're interested in acoustics, like
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, the human ears, human senses in overall are not a perfect sensor, and they are biased, as Brittany has said, to prefer certain ranges. And so, yeah, I guess, so Brittany, as far as the handbells are concerned, if you are trying to write for a melody in the bass, you have to be careful to not allow the battery to sort of overwhelm what you're trying to accomplish in the bass, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've seen frequently in music is if the melody is in the lower bass, say from a C4 to a C5, is that it's also doubled in the lower battery as well. So that, and the lower battery has the ability to sustain the notes a little bit better. And so it's octave doubled. So
I find that it sort of, it's very subtle to the ear when it's doubled under the octave below. So maybe I'll put the melody in the upper bass, lower battery, and then just double it below. And I was
If you have
figuring,
access to chimes, those can help as well.
yeah, because I find we recently acquired some bass chimes at the church, and I find that those, people are absolutely wowed by them. So I thought it would be nice to write a concerto, well, a small piece by the time I have to bring it down to the requirements of can't have it more than 5 minutes. But something that would feature that particular part, because the chimes, they sound like the organ, except a little bit more sustained, and people are absolutely wowed by it. So I thought it would be wonderful to write something that featured the bass chimes, but I also like the sound of the bass bells, just the sort of the warmth of the depth of sound that you can get with some of those lower bells. But
Definitely.
You'll have to like maybe also consider is like if you want it just in the bass, and this is again like a science thing. So with bells, when you ring a pitch, it also has these overtones built into it automatically. And so you get with your lower bells, you're going to get even more of those overtones, and then they're going to go into that muddy area. With chimes, I learned recently that they do not have overtones at all. If you actually like put it into, it's called a spectrogram. If you put it into one of those, you will just see that pitch. That's just how they're built. They don't have those like bells do. So yeah, I learned that from doing the virtual handbell project and editing everyone's chime part.
Cool. No, acoustics was one of my favorite, like my first degrees in music. So acoustics in that and in linguistics, my favorite subjects, because the science of sound is very cool to me. So.
Yeah,
definitely. So I didn't actually want to allow our chatter about bass bells to really take over. I know that there are other players who are possibly more treble players, so I don't want to discourage them from participating. If we have any treble players or battery players, we're not trying to exclude you. If you had any specific questions here for Brittany, we'd definitely like to hear them.
I was just looking in our chat, and we do have one question which we haven't got to. So I think maybe just before wrapping things up for our after discussion, we'll go to Anne's question. And that was, do you sometimes get asked to write or arrange a piece for handbells to accommodate another instrument, say an obligato instrument? Have you had that kind of an experience? Let's say a bassoon piece.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I play oboe too. I do both. Bassoon is my principal right now though, but so not for handbells in particular, I've never been asked, because my realm is more like orchestral stuff. So if that is your question, no. But did you have a more specific?
It was a question basically about writing that type of music. And do you have any follow-up task?
Well, I was just thinking, you know, sometimes you might do an arrangement for handbells, and then you might get asked to make some changes to accommodate other instruments or groups or what have you. And I just wondered what the best technique was for going about that.
Yeah, so the first question that I always, like, I have been asked to kind of rework something for the different groups that I'm in. Like, for example, I have a cappella piece that I've been working on, and I just got asked to readapt it so it's for choir and orchestra. And so usually I only go back and redo stuff if it's like a specific question. So when that happens, I will sit down with whoever is making that request and ask them, what specifically do you want, and what do you want to be emphasized in that? So if you're adding on another instrument, is the star of the piece going to be this new instrument, or is it going to be the one that already is, and we're just kind of, or is it going to be a combination of the two? And so have that goal in mind right from the get-go, and then kind of work from there. And so that may be that if it's, let's say we're going to add a bassoon to a handbell piece, is the bassoon going to have, I'm biased, is the bassoon going to have the melody? And if so, are they always going to have it? Or do we want to do some kind of counter melody with the bassoon and the treble line, so that both have kind of that added thing? So kind of asking those questions, and it can be really, really beneficial to change it up and to add something to a piece. My only word of caution when you're doing that is that don't think that just because you're adding something that it has to play 24/7. If you're adding bassoon to a piece, it does not have to play every single bar just because there's bassoon. Same with if you're adding choir, like the choir can have 4 bars solo, and then it could be just the bells. So don't be afraid that if you're adding something that to only to add it sparsely.
I think that's probably a great place to wrap up our after discussion. This has been really, really a good discussion. And I'm really excited now to see your next tutorial, where I'm sure we will witness a 16-measure composition for handbells featuring the bassoon right on the spot.
And trombone. Make sure you work trombone into it too.
Why not? And it'll be done right on the spot. So thank you all, and thank you, Brittany, for this Q&A session and the after discussion. On behalf of the Ontario Guild of English Handbell Ringers, thank you, and see you soon.